Chapter 10, Skeletal Muscle Tissue, Part 2, just the last bit of the lecture. So, last time we ended on talking about how the contraction cycle works. It's also worth noting how the end of the contraction occurs so that muscles can relax again. Basically, what happens is that at the neuromuscular junction, the neuron stops releasing acetylcholine. So acetylcholine goes away, it's no longer bound to the receptors, the ion channels are no longer open. That means there's no more continuing generation of the muscle action potential. So there's no more charge moving along the length of the muscle fibers sarcolemma. There's no charge going down in the transverse tubules. So the sarcoplasmic reticulum are no longer releasing calcium. Instead, they do their other function, which is to take up calcium and store it. When enough calcium is removed from the cytoplasm, from the sarcoplasm, then the contraction stops and the muscle can relax. All right. Turns out, as I'm sure you're aware of, there are lots and lots of muscle fibers in any one muscle organ, millions probably. And it turns out that not all of those muscle cells, those muscle fibers, not all of them need to contract at the same time. So only what's needed, only how strong the contraction needs to be, is necessary to recruit. So it turns out that all the different somatic motor neurons that come into the muscle are able to control a subset of the muscle fibers. So as we see here, motor unit 2 controls 3, motor unit 1 controls 2, and so on. And what happens when the muscle is activated to contract is that some of these motor units activate. So say only motor 1 activates, and if that is sufficient, the force from these few muscle fibers enough, then that's all the muscle needs to generate the force needed to move the object. However, if say something's heavier, like instead of lifting a piece of paper, you're now lifting a textbook, then you need to activate more muscle fibers to generate enough force. So motor unit 2 would also activate. So now we have even more muscle fibers contracting to generate the force to move, say, the textbook. And this just keeps going on so that eventually you could activate all of the muscle fibers to generate the maximum force the muscle can generate. And then if it needs more force than that, there's nothing it can do because it has no more muscle fibers to activate. Anyway, the process of activating more motor units to get the job done is called recruitment. It's recruiting more muscle fibers to generate enough force to move the object. All right, there are 3 different kinds of muscle fibers. There's slow oxidative muscle fibers. These are very red, very dark in color because they have a lot of myoglobin, a lot of mitochondria, and a lot of blood capillaries. So again, myoglobin is the protein inside the muscle fiber that binds to oxygen. So there's a lot of oxygen being stored in these muscle fibers. Myoglobin is also red, which is why they are red in color. So these muscle fibers can contract for very long periods of time. However, they're also kind of thin, so they can't generate a lot of power. So they're very useful for activities like, say, aerobics maybe, or the muscles that are always contracting to give us our posture so we can hold our head upright. Those would have lots of slow oxidative fibers. The fast glycolytic fibers are sort of whitish in color. They have very low levels of myoglobin and very few mitochondria. So they also are very large in diameter. So they can generate very powerful contractions, but they can only do it for a limited amount of time. So these could be the muscle fibers that are needed in, say, skeletal muscles that are moving a lot of weight for a short period of time. These would be very important for, say, weightlifting. And then we have an intermediate called the fast oxidative glycolytic fibers. They're sort of an intermediate, so they're sort of pinkish in color, medium size. Basically, they are a midway point between slow oxidative fibers and fast glycolytic fibers. And the fast oxidative glycolytic fibers are good for, say, walking or sprinting, sort of the activities sort of in between maintaining your posture and lifting heavy weights. It's just worth noting that all skeletal muscles have all three of these fibers present. It's just the relative ratios of them that vary from skeletal muscle to skeletal muscle. All right, you can affect your muscles. For instance, if you engage a lot of endurance exercises, running, swimming, um, things that you need to generate a good amount of force, but not a huge amount for long periods of time. Well, you can have your fast glycolytic fibers. Some of them will turn into fast oxidative glycolytic fibers, so that they're a little better for that task. Your muscles become a little better for running, swimming, whatever. But they don't necessarily get huge. The way to get huge muscles is through rapid strength exercises like weightlifting. And what happens here is the fast glycolytic fibers, and probably the other fibers a little bit, but this is the main category. The fast glycolytic fibers get bigger. They engage in hypertrophy. They become wider. So the muscles are bigger not because there's more cells, but because the cells you have are bigger. All right, there are a few muscle disorders out there. There are muscle cramps. Cramp is basically a sustained painful contraction. Basically, you're causing a contraction to happen unconsciously, and it won't stop. And since that's not what's supposed to be going on, it's very uncomfortable. And this is from hyperexcitability of the motor end plate. So the motor end plate is sending a signal, generating the muscle action potential, even though no signal was called for. No acetylcholine was released. Acetylcholine receptors are not bound to. It's just happening when it shouldn't. And you can counter this with some stretching. Overuse is when you use your muscle too much, and it causes some minor tearing that can be repaired and heal. This overuse is the cause of why most people who decide they're going to start exercising stop, because that first day at the gym they really worked out their hardest, and then the next day they are in so much pain that they vow never to go back. Another disorder is muscular dystrophy. Muscular dystrophy is a disorder in which the muscle tissue is destroyed, the skeletal muscle tissue is destroyed and replaced with connective tissue. So over time, their muscles get weaker and smaller, and eventually they do not work effectively at all. All right, that was it for the second part of this chapter lecture. Hope you enjoyed it.